The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime at exactly 2:47 p.m., and Maya Chun stepped into the 32nd floor of Whitmore, Harrison and Associates. The polished marble floors reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the prestigious law firm's break room. She moved with an economy of motion that most people missed. No wasted steps, no unnecessary movements. Just purposeful navigation toward the coffee station. The break room buzzed with the kind of energy that came after a successful morning in court. 3 associates clustered around the mahogany conference table, their designer suits and confident postures marking them as the firm's rising stars. Jessica Whitmore, blonde hair perfectly styled and wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, held court at the center of the group. Her father's name was literally on the building's directory, and she'd never let anyone forget it. "Did you see Morrison's face when I cited that 1987 precedent?" Jessica laughed, her voice carrying the particular pitch of someone accustomed to being heard. He had no idea what hit him. Brad Kellerman, the managing partner's nephew, loosened his Hermes tie and leaned back in his chair. His Harvard law ring caught the light as he gestured dismissively. "Please, that was child's play. Wait until you see what I'm planning for the Henderson case tomorrow. I'm going to destroy their entire argument in the opening statement." The third member of their trio, Marcus Webb, nodded appreciatively while scrolling through his phone. "Speaking of destroying things, did you guys see the new paralegal they hired? What's her story anyway?" Maya had heard every word, of course. Her hearing had been trained to pick up conversations from much greater distances, in much more dangerous circumstances. But she gave no indication that she was listening as she approached the premium coffee machine, the one reserved for associates and partners, though no sign explicitly said so. The hierarchy was simply understood. "Look what the cat dragged in," Jessica whispered, though not quietly enough. Her voice carried that particular tone of manufactured surprise that meant the comment was entirely intentional. Maya's second-hand blazer, navy blue, well-maintained but clearly from a discount store, drew their attention like a beacon. The fabric was good quality, but it lacked the subtle details that marked expensive clothing. The perfect tailoring, the designer buttons, the way truly expensive fabric moved. In a firm where appearances mattered almost as much as legal acumen, Maya's wardrobe marked her as an outsider. She reached for a coffee cup from the stack beside the machine, her movements precise and controlled. The associates' conversation had shifted, but their eyes remained fixed on her with the kind of predatory attention that came naturally to people accustomed to finding weakness in others. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly, her voice steady and professional. She needed to reach past Brad to access the coffee machine's control panel. "Brad." Kellerman looked up from his phone with exaggerated surprise, as if he hadn't noticed her standing there for the past 30 seconds. At 6'2", with the kind of athletic build that came from expensive personal trainers, he was accustomed to using his physical presence to intimidate. He shifted in his chair, deliberately expanding his posture to take up more space, but didn't move aside. "Oh, sorry," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "Didn't see you there." He paused, letting his eyes travel over her outfit with obvious disdain. "Premium coffee is for actual lawyers, though. There's a vending machine down the hall that might be more appropriate." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica covered her mouth to hide a smile, while Marcus looked up from his phone with interest. They were waiting to see how the new paralegal would respond to being put in her place. Maya's expression didn't change. She'd faced down armed insurgents in Kandahar. A privileged law school graduate wasn't going to rattle her. But something flickered behind her dark eyes. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of cold assessment that would have made anyone with combat experience very nervous. "I see," she said simply, her voice remaining level. "Thank you for clarifying the policy." The response wasn't what Brad had expected. Most people would have either backed down apologetically or gotten defensive. Maya's calm acceptance somehow made his victory feel hollow, which only irritated him further. "It's not personal," Jessica chimed in, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used with court clerks and junior staff. "It's just that the firm has certain standards. I'm sure you understand." Maya nodded once, a sharp, economical movement. "Of course." The associates exchanged glances, their amusement growing. This was easier than they'd expected. The new paralegal was clearly intimidated, knowing her place in the firm's hierarchy. It was almost disappointing how quickly she'd folded. Marcus decided to pile on. "I heard you went to state," he said, naming the local public university with the kind of disdain usually reserved for discussing communicable diseases. "That must have been different. Very different from what we're used to here." "Different how?" Maya asked, though her tone suggested she already knew exactly what he meant. "Well, you know," Marcus gestured vaguely. "The caliber of education and networking opportunities. The preparation for this kind of environment. It's just a completely different world from places like Harvard, Yale, Columbia." He trailed off, letting the implication hang. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that lasted perhaps a tenth of a second. To the associates, she appeared unchanged, but someone with the right training would have recognized it as a warning sign. "I imagine it was," she agreed quietly. Brad leaned forward, sensing weakness. "Don't take it personally. Everyone has to start somewhere. Maybe if you work really hard, pay attention to how things are done around here, you might eventually—" He shrugged, as if her potential advancement was too remote to contemplate seriously. The break room's air conditioning unit, which had been humming quietly in the background, suddenly gave a mechanical groan and fell silent. Within moments, the temperature began to rise noticeably. The afternoon sun, which had seemed pleasant through the windows, now felt oppressive without the cooling system's circulation. "Great," Jessica muttered, fanning herself with a legal brief. As if this day couldn't get any worse. Maya remained standing by the coffee machine, seemingly unaffected by the rising temperature. She'd endured 120-degree heat in full combat gear. A warm break room was hardly worth noticing. But around her, the associates were already beginning to show signs of discomfort. Brad loosened his tie further and unbuttoned his collar. "This building's maintenance is a joke. You'd think for what they charge in rent, they could keep the AC working." Sweat was beginning to form on Jessica's carefully made-up forehead, threatening her perfect appearance. She glanced at Maya with growing irritation, as if the paralegal's apparent comfort with the heat was somehow a personal affront. "Aren't you hot?" Marcus asked, pulling at his shirt collar. Maya looked at him with those same dark, steady eyes. "Not particularly." The simple response somehow made the associates even more uncomfortable. There was something unsettling about her composure, though none of them could quite put their finger on what it was. She stood there like a statue, unaffected by the heat, unruffled by their comments, watching them with the kind of patience that suggested she could wait all day if necessary. The temperature continued to climb, and Maya finally reached for the buttons of her blazer. The heat in the break room had become oppressive within minutes. What started as a minor inconvenience was rapidly becoming unbearable, as the afternoon sun beat through the floor-to-ceiling windows with no air circulation to provide relief. The temperature gauge on the wall climbed steadily past 78 degrees, heading toward 80. Jessica Whitmore dabbed at her forehead with a tissue, careful not to disturb her makeup, but perspiration was already beginning to show through her foundation. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was starting to lose its shape in the humidity that was building without the dehumidifying effect of the air conditioning. She shot an annoyed glance at the silent AC unit as if her disapproval alone could resurrect it. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, using a stack of legal documents as an improvised fan. The papers fluttered weakly, providing minimal relief. "I have a client meeting in an hour. I can't show up looking like I just ran a marathon." Brad Kellerman had already shed his suit jacket, draping it over the back of his chair with the kind of casual disregard that came from owning dozens of similar garments. His white dress shirt was beginning to show damp patches under the arms, despite the expensive antiperspirant he'd applied that morning. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing a Rolex Submariner that probably cost more than Maya's annual salary. "Someone needs to call maintenance," he declared, as if the thought hadn't occurred to anyone else. "This is unacceptable. We're not paying premium office rent to work in a sauna." Marcus Webb was faring the worst of the three. His naturally heavy build made him more susceptible to heat, and his face was already flushed red. He'd loosened his tie completely and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt, but sweat was still beading on his forehead and upper lip. He kept glancing at Maya with growing irritation, as if her apparent comfort was somehow making his discomfort worse. "How are you not dying right now?" he asked Maya directly, his voice carrying a note of accusation. Maya stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady and controlled, while the 3 associates wilted around her. Like flowers in a drought, she remained perfectly composed. Her blazer was still buttoned, her hair still neat, no visible signs of perspiration despite the climbing temperature. "I'm fine," she said simply, her voice as level as it had been when the room was cooled on. The response only seemed to irritate them further. There was something almost supernatural about her composure, something that made their own discomfort feel exaggerated by comparison. Jessica found herself studying Maya's face for any sign of weakness, any crack in that infuriating calm. "Well, some of us are human," Jessica snapped, immediately regretting the petty comment, but too proud to take it back. Maya's dark eyes shifted to Jessica for a moment, and something flickered there. Not anger, but a kind of cold assessment that made Jessica suddenly uncomfortable. It was the look of someone taking measurements, calculating distances, evaluating threats. The moment passed so quickly that Jessica almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. The temperature continued its relentless climb. Brad was now openly sweating, dark patches spreading across his expensive shirt. He kept tugging at his collar, as if he could somehow create more airflow. "This is insane. I'm calling building management right now." He pulled out his phone and began dialing, but his fingers were slick with perspiration, and he had to wipe them on his pants before he could operate the touchscreen effectively. The call went straight to voicemail, which only increased his frustration. "Of course they're not answering," he muttered. "Probably sitting in their air-conditioned office while we roast up here." Maya finally moved, her hands going to the top button of her blazer. The motion was deliberate and controlled, like everything else about her. She worked the button free with practiced efficiency, then moved to the second button, then the third. Finally showing some skin for attention? Brad sneered, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The heat was making him irritable, and Maya's continued composure was getting under his skin in a way he couldn't quite explain. Maya didn't respond to the comment. She simply continued unbuttoning her blazer with the same methodical precision. When she reached the final button, she shrugged the garment off her shoulders, revealing a simple black tank top underneath. The fabric was plain, unremarkable, the kind of basic garment you could buy at any department store. But as Maya turned to hang her blazer on the back of an empty chair, her back came into view, and the world seemed to stop. The laughter that had been building in Brad's throat died instantly. Jessica's improvised paper fan froze mid-flutter. Marcus's phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers and clattered onto the table, covering Maya's entire back, from the base of her neck to just above her waistline, was an intricate tattoo rendered in black and gray ink. The artistry was extraordinary, clearly the work of a master tattoo artist, probably costing thousands of dollars and requiring dozens of hours to complete. But it wasn't the artistic quality that had struck the three associates speechless. At the center of the design was a skull wearing a military beret, its empty eye sockets seeming to stare directly at whoever was looking. The skull was surrounded by a complex arrangement of symbols, coordinates, dates, and text that told a story written in the language of warfare. Along the top, in precise military font, were the words, "Death before dishonor," in English, with what appeared to be the same phrase in Latin below it, "Mors ante dedicus." Beneath that was an insignia that Jessica recognized with a shock of realization, the distinctive winged dagger of the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the U.S. Army's most elite units. But it was the details surrounding the central image that truly told the story. Coordinates were etched in small, precise numbers, 34.5553 N, 69.2075 E, Kabul, Afghanistan, 33.9391 N, 67.7100 E, Ghazni Province, 31.6167 N, 65.7167 E, Kandahar. Each set of coordinates was accompanied by dates, spanning from 2018 to 2022, marking deployments that coincided with some of the most dangerous periods of the war in Afghanistan. Down the left side of her back was a list of names in elegant script, each followed by a small cross. The names were clearly those of fallen comrades, brothers and sisters in arms, who hadn't made it home. There were 12 names in total, each one representing a life lost, a family destroyed, a future cut short. On the right side were more symbols: a purple heart, a bronze star, a combat infantry badge. These weren't decorative elements. They were representations of actual medals, actual recognition for actual valor under fire. Below them were more dates, more coordinates, more pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture of someone who had seen and done things that most people couldn't even imagine. Maya calmly hung her blazer on the chair, seemingly oblivious to the stunned silence behind her. She moved with the same controlled precision as before, but now the precision took on new meaning. This wasn't the careful movement of someone trying to fit in. This was the ingrained muscle memory of someone trained to move efficiently under any circumstances. Someone for whom wasted motion could mean the difference between life and death. The break room had become completely silent, except for the sound of three people trying to process what they were seeing. The heat that had seemed so oppressive moments before was forgotten, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Maya turned back toward the coffee machine, and for the first time, the associates got a clear look at her arms. Her left shoulder bore a small, perfectly round scar, unmistakably a bullet wound. On her right forearm was another scar, this one, longer and more jagged, probably from shrapnel or a knife. She reached for the coffee machine's controls with the same calm efficiency she'd shown all along, but now every movement carried new weight. This wasn't a paralegal trying to get coffee. This was a warrior who had earned the right to stand wherever she chose. The silence in the break room stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the distant hum of traffic, 32 floors below, and the occasional creak of the building settling in the afternoon heat. Jessica Whitmore's mouth had gone completely dry, and it wasn't from the temperature. Her eyes traced the intricate details of Maya's tattoo with growing horror at her own behavior. Each symbol and date adding another layer to a story she was only beginning to comprehend. Marcus Webb's phone lay forgotten on the mahogany table where it had fallen, its screen still glowing with an unfinished text message. His face had gone from flushed red to pale white in the span of seconds, and his hands trembled slightly as the full implications of what he was seeing began to sink in. He'd grown up in a military family, his grandfather had served in Vietnam, his uncle in Desert Storm, and he recognized the significance of what was displayed across Maya's back with crystal clarity. Brad Kellerman, despite his privileged upbringing and Ivy League education, found himself completely out of his depth. The coordinates meant nothing to him initially, just random numbers that could have been anything. But the military insignia, the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, even someone with his sheltered background knew what those symbols represented. His earlier smugness had evaporated entirely, replaced by a growing sense of dread as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Maya moved to the coffee machine with the same unhurried precision she'd displayed all afternoon. But now every gesture carried new weight. She selected a coffee pod from the selection available, premium Colombian, the expensive kind that Brad had claimed was reserved for actual lawyers, and inserted it into the machine. The mechanical whir of the brewing process seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Jessica's boyfriend, Captain Ryan Morrison, was stationed at Fort Bragg with the 82nd Airborne. She'd heard enough of his stories, seen enough of his own scars, to understand exactly what she was looking at. The 75th Ranger Regiment wasn't just any military unit. It was one of the most elite fighting forces in the world, composed of volunteers who had already proven themselves in other units before even being allowed to attempt the grueling selection process. That's... Jessica's voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat constricted with a mixture of shame and awe. That's Delta Force insignia. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you say?" "The skull with the beret," Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength as military knowledge gleaned from countless conversations with Ryan came flooding back. "That's not just Rangers. That's special operations. The dates, the coordinates, those are deployment markers." Maya's hand paused for just a fraction of a second as she reached for the sugar dispenser, the only indication that she'd heard Jessica's words. But she didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the conversation happening behind her. She simply continued preparing her coffee with the same methodical care. Brad fumbled for his phone, his fingers still slick with perspiration as he pulled up Google. His hand shook slightly as he typed in the Latin phrase he could make out across Maya's shoulders: Mors ante dedicus. The translation appeared instantly: death before dishonor. Below it, search results flooded the screen with references to special operations units, elite military formations, and the kind of classified operations that made headlines only when something went catastrophically wrong. Jesus Christ, he breathed, scrolling through images of military insignia that matched what he was seeing on Maya's back. This is real. This is all real. Marcus had recovered enough to pick up his phone, and his military family connections were proving invaluable. He recognized the coordinates that Jessica had missed, the numbers that marked specific locations in Afghanistan, where some of the war's most dangerous operations had taken place. His uncle had mentioned Ghazni province in hushed tones, describing it as a place where American forces faced some of their heaviest resistance. "Those coordinates," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "Ghazni, Kandahar, Kabul. Those aren't just deployment locations. Those are where the worst fighting happened, where people died." The list of names down Maya's left side took on new meaning with this context. These weren't just fallen comrades. They were brothers and sisters who had died in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, during operations that would never be fully declassified. Each name represented a family that had received a folded flag and a knock on their door that changed everything forever. Maya finished preparing her coffee and turned around, her dark eyes sweeping across the three associates with the same calm assessment she'd shown all afternoon. But now they understood what they were seeing. not the patient tolerance of someone trying to fit in, but the controlled awareness of someone trained to evaluate threats and calculate responses in milliseconds. "The Henderson case files are on my desk," she said quietly, her voice carrying no trace of emotion. "I've already reviewed the precedents you'll need for tomorrow's hearing." The casual mention of Brad's case, the one he'd been so confident about just minutes earlier, hit him like a physical blow. She'd been working on his case. The paralegal he'd dismissed and humiliated had been preparing the research that would make or break his argument in court. Jessica's mind was racing, connecting dots with the kind of analytical precision that had made her a successful litigator. The scars on Maya's arms weren't from accidents or mishaps. They were combat wounds, proof of close-quarters fighting that most people only saw in movies. The bullet wound on her shoulder was perfectly round and clean, suggesting it had been treated by military medics under field conditions. "How many deployments?" Marcus asked suddenly, the question escaping before he could stop himself. Maya's eyes shifted to him, and for a moment he saw something flicker behind that controlled exterior. Not anger, but a kind of weary recognition. She'd been asked this question before, probably by well-meaning civilians who had no frame of reference for what the answer really meant. "4," she said simply. "4 deployments. 4 separate tours in one of the most dangerous theaters of operation in modern military history." The average deployment lasted 12 to 15 months, meaning Maya had spent the better part of 4 years in active combat zones, facing dangers that most people couldn't even imagine. Brad's phone buzzed with a news alert, and he glanced at it reflexively. The headline made his blood run cold. "Pentagon honors classified operation heroes in private ceremony." The article was brief, mentioning a group of special operations personnel who had been recognized for their service in Afghanistan, but the details were heavily redacted. What wasn't redacted was a reference to a rescue operation in Kabul that had saved the lives of 12 American hostages, including the daughter of a Supreme Court justice. The coordinates on Maya's back included Kabul. The dates matched the time frame mentioned in the article, and there were 12 names on her memorial list. "The ghost," Jessica whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Maya's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips, and for the first time since entering the break room, her composure cracked slightly. It was barely perceptible, a slight tightening around her eyes, a momentary stillness that lasted perhaps 2 seconds. But it was enough to confirm Jessica's suspicion. Ryan had mentioned the ghost in hushed, reverent tones, a legendary special operations soldier whose identity was never publicly revealed, someone who had pulled off impossible missions and saved countless lives. The stories were always secondhand, always classified, always spoken with the kind of awe reserved for genuine heroes. And she was standing in their break room, wearing a secondhand blazer, having been mocked and dismissed by 3 lawyers who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the world. She'd inhabited for 4 years. The weight of their behavior crashed down on all 3 associates simultaneously. They had humiliated a decorated war hero, someone who had risked everything to serve her country, someone who had earned the right to stand anywhere. She chose through blood and sacrifice they couldn't begin to comprehend. Maya took a sip of her coffee, the premium coffee that Brad had told her wasn't for people like her, and her eyes met his over the rim of the cup. There was no anger there, no desire for revenge or retribution. Just a calm, steady gaze that somehow made their shame burn even hotter. Maya took another measured sip of her coffee, the premium Colombian blend that Brad had declared off-limits to people like her just 20 minutes earlier. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, but she showed no satisfaction in the reversal, no smugness at their obvious discomfort. She simply stood there, radiating the same calm control she'd maintained throughout their entire encounter, while 3 of the firm's rising stars grappled with the magnitude of their mistake. The break room door opened with a soft click, and senior partner William Harrison stepped inside. His silver hair perfectly styled despite the building's climate control issues. At 68, Harrison commanded respect through decades of legal excellence and a reputation for fairness that had built Whitmore, Harrison and Associates into one of the city's most prestigious firms. His sharp blue eyes immediately took in the scene, three associates looking like they'd seen a ghost, and Maya standing calmly by the coffee machine. "Miss Chun," Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "I've been looking everywhere for you. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Maya set down her coffee cup and straightened, her posture shifting subtly into something more formal. "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" Harrison's expression was grave as he pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "The Pentagon just called. They need our best military law expert for a high-profile case. Apparently, there's been a development in the Morrison court-martial. You know, the one involving the alleged war crimes in Syria. The defense is claiming new evidence has surfaced that could exonerate their client." The three associates exchanged glances, suddenly understanding why Maya had been hired. This wasn't just any paralegal position. She was here specifically for her military expertise, her understanding of combat operations and military law that no civilian lawyer could match. "The case involves classified operations," Harrison continued, "which means we need someone with the appropriate security clearance and first-hand knowledge of special operations protocols. The client specifically requested you by name." Maya nodded once, that same economical movement they'd seen all afternoon. "I'll gather the files and be ready to leave within the hour." "Actually," Harrison said, glancing at his watch, "there's been another development. The client wants to meet immediately. They're sending a car." He paused, studying Maya's face. "I should mention, the client is General Patricia Hawkins, former commander of Joint Special Operations Command. She says she knows you personally." For the first time since entering the break room, Maya's composure showed a crack. Not fear or nervousness, but something that might have been respect, or perhaps old memories surfacing. "General Hawkins was my commanding officer during Operation Nightfall." The name meant nothing to the associates, but Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Even with his limited military knowledge, he recognized the significance of a personal recommendation from someone at that level of command. "She spoke very highly of your work," Harrison said. "In fact, she specifically mentioned that you were instrumental in saving the lives of 12 hostages during a classified operation in Kabul. She said, and I quote, 'Maya Chun is the finest soldier I've ever had the privilege to command. And if you're smart, you'll put her in charge of anything involving military law.'" The words hit the three associates like physical blows. Jessica felt her stomach drop as she realized the full scope of what they'd done. They hadn't just mocked a paralegal. They'd humiliated someone, personally recommended by one of the highest-ranking military officers in the country. Brad's face had gone completely white. His phone was still open to the news article about the classified Pentagon ceremony, and now the pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The 12 hostages mentioned in the article, the Kabul coordinates on Maya's back, the 12 names memorialized in her tattoo. It was all connected. Marcus was frantically Googling General Hawkins on his phone, and what he found made his hand shake. Patricia Hawkins was a legend in military circles, a 3-star general who had commanded some of the most sensitive operations in recent history. For her to personally recommend someone met that person had proven themselves under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Maya moved toward the door, but Harrison held up a hand. "Before you go, there's something else. The firm's board met this morning, and we've decided to create a new division focused specifically on veterans' rights and military law. We want you to head it up." The offer hung in the air like a thunderbolt. Jessica's mouth fell open. Heading a division was a position typically reserved for senior associates or junior partners, not paralegals. It was the kind of opportunity that lawyers spent years working toward. The position comes with a substantial salary increase. Of course, Harrison continued, and a partnership track if you're interested in pursuing your law degree. We'll cover the tuition and arrange your schedule around classes. Maya was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes moving from Harrison to the three associates who had spent the afternoon making her feel unwelcome. When she spoke, her voice was steady and professional. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Harrison. I'll need some time to consider it. Of course, Harrison nodded. Take all the time you need. But I should mention, General Hawkins suggested that someone with your background and experience could revolutionize how we handle military cases. She believes you can help veterans navigate the legal system in ways that traditional lawyers simply can't. As Harrison spoke, Maya began putting her blazer back on, the simple action somehow carrying enormous weight. The three associates watched in fascination and horror as the tattoo disappeared beneath the second-hand fabric. The evidence of her extraordinary service, hidden once again behind the unremarkable exterior they had so casually dismissed. There's a car waiting downstairs, Harrison said, checking his phone. Military transport. They're taking this very seriously. Maya nodded and picked up her coffee cup, finishing the last sip of the premium Colombian blend. As she set the empty cup down, she looked directly at Brad for the first time since he'd blocked her access to the coffee machine. The coffee really isn't bad, she said quietly, her voice carrying no trace of sarcasm or anger. But next time, you might want to ask about someone's qualifications before deciding what they deserve. The words were delivered with the same calm professionalism she'd maintained all afternoon, but they cut deeper than any angry outburst could have. Brad felt his face burn with shame as he realized she was giving him advice, not seeking revenge. As Maya moved toward the door, Harrison turned to address the three associates directly. His expression had hardened considerably, and his voice carried the kind of authority that had built his reputation. That woman, he said, his words precise and deliberate, single-handedly extracted 12 hostages from a compound in Kabul while under heavy enemy fire. She's been awarded the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and the Distinguished Service Cross. She speaks 4 languages fluently, holds a master's degree in international law, and has a security clearance higher than most senators. The associate sat in stunned silence as Harrison continued. She chose to work here because she wants to help veterans who are struggling with legal issues, people who served their country and came home to find themselves lost in a system that doesn't understand what they've been through. She could have taken a position with any law firm in the country or worked directly for the Pentagon, but she chose us because she believed in our commitment to justice. Harrison's eyes moved from Jessica to Marcus to Brad, his disappointment evident. I suggest you think very carefully about how you treat people in the future. You never know who you're talking to, and more importantly, you never know what someone has sacrificed for the freedoms you take for granted. With that, Harrison followed Maya out of the break room, leaving the three associates alone with their shame and the lingering heat of the broken air conditioning. The silence stretched on for several minutes, broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the distant hum of the city below. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to apologize. How do you apologize for something like that? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. How do you apologize to someone who's done what she's done? Brad was staring at his phone, reading article after article about military operations in Afghanistan, trying to understand the world that Maya had inhabited while he was complaining about law school exams and internship applications. Every story he read made their behavior seem more inexcusable. "We don't deserve her forgiveness," he said finally. "But we have to try." Outside, 32 floors below, a black SUV with government plates waited at the curb. Maya Chun, the woman they had dismissed as beneath them, walked out of the building with the same controlled precision she'd shown all afternoon. She was exactly who the firm needed most, exactly who their veteran clients deserved to have fighting for them. And for the first time in their privileged lives, 3 successful lawyers understood what it meant to be truly humbled by someone who had earned their respect through service, sacrifice, and a quiet dignity that no amount of money or education could buy. The ghost had walked among them, and they had been too blind to see.